If one may again be allowed to search into heaven's plan, it is easy to guess at the purpose behind such a public and such a typically Canadian favor as a prayer-built bridge of ice across the St. Lawrence River. It was Our Lady's way of drawing attention to the fact that she had chosen this spot for her own. Such an obvious, even spectacular happening, so contrary to what could have been expected from merely natural causes, served then, as it does now, as a colorful and easily read sign pointing towards the obscure spot on the North American continent she had chosen for a repetition of the favors that would mark her traditional place of pilgrimage in the Old World. The Queen of the Rosary apparently wanted people to come to Cap-de-la-Madeleine, and come they did, drawn by the report of the marvelous ice bridge. A thin trickle of pilgrims immediately began to arrive from outside the immediate area. They saw lying beside the foundation of the new church the pile of stone that had crossed the bridge. They went to the confraternity altar in the little stone church and prayed before the statue that smiled down from it. They heard Father speak of the power of devotion to Our Lady of the Rosary, and they knew that they were in the presence of an unusual supernatural power. They enrolled in the confraternity, placed their petitions at the feet of the Queen of the Rosary, and carried home with them rose petals blessed on the confraternity altar. Many of them returned time and again. Some came back to renew their petition or simply to feel once more the spiritual blessing of this special place. Others visited the little chapel again in pilgrimage of thanksgiving for an answered prayer. On the Feast of the Holy Rosary, 1880, the new parish church was dedicated, and the old stone church became, in fact, if not yet, in formal dedication, the Chapel of the Holy Rosary. Though that formal dedication was still 8 years away, the people did not wait for the technicality. From this time on, we find reports of favors mentioning the shrine of Our Lady of the Rosary at the Cape. The little stone chapel had already been added to the Rosary as a focal point of devotion to Our Lady of Cap-de-la-Madeleine. A man who was to leave on the infant shrine an imprint it still bears made his first visit to Cap-de-la-Madeleine on September 29, 1881. He was Father Frederic who had just come from 3 years' service in the Holy Land, where he had been Assistant Superior of the Franciscan Custodians of the Sacred Places. He had crossed the Atlantic to found a Canadian commissariat of the Holy Land and to ask the hierarchy if they would establish an annual collection for the upkeep of the holy places. He had arrived at Quebec on August 24th, but the phenomenally enthusiastic popular reaction to his preaching had made him front-page news wherever he went and spread his name in this short time throughout French Canada. In his illustrated life of good Father Frederic, Father Lamontagne quotes the word picture drawn by a Holy Land pilgrim who seems to have caught the atmosphere Father Frederic created by his preaching either in Palestine or in Canada. His very appearance is a sermon. Upon seeing this friar standing on a stone, head bare, his face pale, and colored only by the effort of thinking, his body emaciated and seeming no longer to be of this world, while in his feverish and ecstatic eyes shines the light of another world, one feels that the supernatural is his element and that his life is Christ. When the saintly Franciscan came to Three Rivers, he made a profound impression on Father two brothers, one of whom, Alfred, was editor of the Journal des Trois-Rivières. They told Father Frederic about the marvels of Cap-de-la-Madeleine and invited him to meet their brother in whom they knew he would find a kindred spirit. Father Frederic was only too willing to see this place and meet this man about whom he had no doubt already heard much since coming to Three Rivers. The approach to the place was sufficient to make the Franciscan fall in love with it at first sight. They went down to the St. Lawrence River, paddling at bow and stern of a canoe hollowed from a single log, the brown-robed friar seated in the middle. It was early on one of those perfect days early autumn sometimes brings to cold temperate lands. The cool, broad waters of the great river rippled and sparkled back the rays of the unclouded sun that held no fierceness in its splendor. The trees mingled the comfort of evergreen with the exciting tints from the delicate yellow to blazing red that heralds Canada's fall. The sky was the fairest of blue, and the sharp air tingled like a draught of invigorating wine. Father Frederic wrote an almost ecstatic description of the scene in words that might have come from his father, St. Francis. The eyes of fresh enthusiasm see beauty where the accustomed glance picks out only the flaws. But all the world looks wonderful on such glorious days, and Father Frederic had just come to this land of water and trees from the fierce sun and the bare dry earth of Palestine. Whether or not the Cape had then the beauty it has now, the sense of natural loveliness was fitting prelude to the spiritual beauty generated in the meeting that was about to take place. From the first, Father Disselet and Father Frederic took to each other like twin souls. At last, the Canadian priest had met someone to whom he could pour out experiences, thoughts, and dreams he had held too intimate for easy discussion even among closest friends. The two men lived on the same spiritual level, and they did not often meet another who breathed the same rarefied air. The visitor was pressed to make the little presbytery his headquarters so that the two could get enough of talking to each other. The call of apostolic duty would probably have forbidden any extended stay, even after the invitation was accepted, had not the Franciscan been stricken with illness, which confined him to the Cap-de-la-Madeleine presbytery from January 17th until he was suddenly recalled to the Near East at the end of April 1882. From September until the time of his illness, Father Frederic had been under the pressure of a constant succession of missions all over Quebec. His new friend, Father Disselet, felt called upon to write about it to his Franciscan superiors at Rome. After saying, "You have sent me a saint and a religious of great capacity," and telling the great success of Father Frederic's preaching, he added, "They are literally quarreling over him. A great many priests come here, wanting to have him preach. If he satisfied all of them, it would be impossible for him to occupy himself with the special mission on which he was sent." Physical collapse put an end to the impossible burden, and as soon as the patient was sufficiently recovered, there was ample time for full discussion of Father Disselet's plans for Cap-de-la-Madeleine. Providence could scarcely have sent him a better guide and advisor, and at a better time. A country priest with an infant shrine on his hands had been sent a world-traveled apostle with executive experience at the Christian Shrine of Shrines. A humble man whose experience with pilgrims was limited to a few individuals from the surrounding districts, Father Disselet, in spite of the growing evidence of 15 years, still wondered if it was not presumptuous of him to think Our Lady had picked his little parish out of all North America as a place of special favor in the New World. Here, as though sent by Our Lady to strengthen his faith and confirm the facts, was a man who had preached to pilgrims from all over the world, who had witnessed the particular effects of grace in a particular place, who no longer speculated on the mystery of one spot on earth being marked for special blessing, but knew with certainty that such things did have a place in the divine plan. And Father Disselet had another virtue that wrestled with his inward certainty about the shrine. He was a churchman of churchmen, and extremely cautious about any spiritual manifestation outside the ordinary channels of grace. The Franciscan, who seemed to have been brought providentially to his aid, was a priest formed in the same French school who had learned from contact with 1,000 individual souls that the church was a mother, not a jailer, that the whole function of its organization was to initiate, foster, and protect the growth of grace in the individual soul. The long conversations of these days remain secrets shared by the two apostles, but Father Disselet came out of them strengthened and encouraged to go ahead with his rosary plans. He showed the influence of Father Frederic in his expressed desire to keep him at the Cape, and although the inspiring friar had no exterior connection with the shrine beyond living in its presbytery that winter, it is perhaps permissible to read from the records the effect of his long talks with the pastor of Cap-de-la-Madeleine. That same summer saw the first reported cure to carry the endorsement of Father Disselet's signature. The following year saw the first organized pilgrimage, and although Father Frederic was far away from Canada during the next 6.5 years, his influence may be read in the firmness with which the little chapel marched towards its formal dedication as a place of Marian pilgrimage. It is possible that there was also a practical side to these conversations, advice about the technical problems of conducting a shrine. For Father Frederic was a very practical man. If his cause, which is now in Rome, brings him the honors of the altar, he will go down in history as the first canonized traveling salesman. That's what Frederic Jansen was before he entered the Franciscans. He traveled in linen for the firm of Albert Ledieu, and did so well on the road that he won several promotions in the 5 years he was with the company. He dressed well. He says himself that he was something of a dandy, and liked nothing better than to drive up to a prospect in a polished carriage and walk in waving his silver-knobbed cane. He believed that you have to be sold on your own product before you can sell it to anyone else, and he lived by the axiom, no sales without calls. Grace builds on nature. It was into the traveling salesman, Frederic Jansen of Esters, that God poured grace by which he became Father Frederic. When the young man gave himself to God in the Franciscan order, he did what every Christian is called upon to do. He laid at Christ's feet, along with the years of his life, all the gifts, training, and experience that had come from his own particular circumstances and abilities. There is no other path to sanctity. You can go to God only as you. You can't go as an imitation of someone else, unless that someone else is also God. So the Franciscan was a man dressed to suit his vocation in the poverty of Christ. He was a man who lived in the love of God before holding that love out to other hearts. He was a man who walked the roads of Canada, carrying that love from door to door, as he had once ridden the roads of France with his linen samples. The door to door is literal. He sold his books that way over 4 large provinces to raise funds for several good works. He knew so many individuals as individuals that when he died in 1916, thousands of people felt they had lost a personal friend. In addition to this, he had been meticulous to the point of taking voluminous notes, sprinkled with measurements about recording material details of the shrines of the Holy Land and other sanctuaries he had visited in Europe. Much of this know-how must have poured over Father Disselet as he was receiving a spiritual transfusion from a man whose mystical blood was the same type as his own. It is easy to understand why Father Disselet wanted Father Frederic to remain near him at the Cape, but the Franciscans sailed for Europe on May 1st, 1882, to return at a moment that seems even more strikingly providential than the timing of his first visit.